Hello and welcome. My name is Lexi Jong, and here I like to talk about luxury beauty. And today we are actually going to be talking about Fude brushes. I love Fude brushes. I have been slowly amassing quite a collection, and I have had a lot of requests recently for a video featuring, what starter brushes would you start with if you are interested in Fude. So we're going to take a look at what I would recommend, and we're going to start off kind of like we'll go over like what brush type I'd recommend and then my favorites from that particular category. So this could be like a starter set or a gift set, or if you're looking to like revitalize some of your brushes that have been getting older, stuff like that. So first of all, just a little bit about Fude. If you are unfamiliar with the term Fude, that is in regards to handmade Japanese makeup brushes. So in that case, they actually have all of the hair fibers. They are natural hair typically. Traditionally, they were natural hair. They also now have synthetic hair brushes as well. For example, the Westman Atelier brushes are actually Fude brushes as well. They are synthetic. Each of the major lines like Chikuhodo, Hakuhodo, and so forth, they also have synthetic brushes and fibers in theirs as well. So just because it's Fude does not mean there are not vegan options. However, I personally prefer natural hair. So the majority of the brushes I'm going to be talking about are going to be natural hair. So what they do is they take those hairs or those synthetic fibers and they actually hand bundle them and put them in the ferrule. So, your hair length, we see this much, but it's going to be much longer and it's going to be all gathered in here. And it's all about how they place it as to how you get that shape. So they actually have to create this shape by hand in order for it to be a Fude brush. They do not cut the hairs. These are all going to be the natural tip. So that's important because if you look at your own hair, your shaft of the hair is going to be thicker and wider. And when it gets to the tip, it's thinner. It's going to be a little bit softer as well. So that makes the application very different from something that's been cut with scissors, which is going to have a sharp, blunt end. And it will also end up feeling harsher on the skin. So that's one of the reasons these are hand bundled. And this brush here that I'm holding up is actually Isam W23. This is a sable hairbrush. Isam, I love their synthetics, their V series, by the way, check those out. But their W brushes, I'm pretty sure all of them are sable hair. I'd have to go through each of mine to double check. But their W brushes in general are sable hair, which is a type of weasel. And you can actually use those with liquids, creams, and powders. So sable is kind of an exception to that because it is colored. But for the most part, if we're looking at, Fude brushes, if it has brown hair, it is most often going to be dyed or perhaps a squirrel hair or something more delicate. So these would typically be something that you would use with a powder product, whereas something white is typically going to be undyed goat hair, which can be used with liquids, creams, and powders. So let's go ahead and get started. And we are going to let's start off with these three that I was holding in the beginning. These are my picks for a concealer brush. Now, I think it really depends what you are looking for in your concealing needs. So if we're talking about under eye concealer, I personally, this is my number one pick. This is the Sonia G Soft Concealer. This is part of the Fusion series, and so is this one here, the Jumbo Concealer. So these are both in my picks. These are a blend of undyed goat hair as well as two different types of synthetic fibers. I like this one for something a little bit more fluffy. It gives it a really soft finish. And again, it has that blend of natural and synthetic hairs. So it's really soft. You've got a lot of control. And I just think it's a great shape. Now, if you are working in larger areas or you prefer a flatter brush, I think the Jumbo Concealer is a great one. Before these debuted, my go-to brush was actually this Isam brush, the W23, which is technically a shader brush for eyeshadow, and I do use it for that. You can also use this like wet with metallic shadows and so forth. This brush in particular works really well for that because you can see that there's not a whole lot of flexibility here, and that allows you to put down some of those glittery shades without getting like a lot of fallout and so forth. But I also find it works really well for under eye concealer. So these are my favorite for that. Now, I have struggled with acne in the past. Now I don't get it too frequently, so I don't typically bother concealing it. But when I did, the style of brush that I preferred was this. This is a no-name brush that I picked up from Michael's, which I think might have been called MJ Designs back then. Like, it's that old. So I was a teenager when I bought this brush, and it's just from the paint section. But what I love about it is the shape and the size of it. So for concealing blemishes, I actually use like a yellow mineral powder typically, and I will rub this in here and then swirl it on the spot before covering anything with like regular makeup. This also works well for liquid concealers. I just always typically gravitate it towards kind of like a yellow mineral powder, which works really well for color correction. So this is my style for that. I just had to include this. I don't have like a recommendation of a particular brush since this one is so old, but I absolutely loved it. And you can see it's a Taklon. It's 4500 filbert. So again, super, super old. Next up, I think that not only do you need a concealer brush in your collection, but you also need a foundation brush. And I would actually recommend having two different styles of foundation brushes, because I think that, you know, depending whether you use a thicker cream foundation versus a thinner serum-like foundation, certain brushes will work better than others. If you're looking for just one, then I would recommend something like this. This is the Rephr 31 brush. You can see that it's slanted at an angle, and you can see that you have these stippling fibers. So we've got these two different sizes here. You've got something more dense here, but you can see that some of the fibers are sticking up a little bit further, and this will give you a stippling effect. And if you only had one foundation brush, I would definitely recommend something with this stippling style. This one is my particular favorite. It's, again, the Rephr 31. It's undyed goat hair, and I believe there are some synthetic fibers mixed in here as well. I'd have to double check their website on that. But why I like this is if you are using a thinner, more serum-like foundation, these stippling fibers work really well with something thin and runny, and you don't end up just wiping it away with a dense brush. So you can stipple this on like this with something very thin. Yet if you're working with something thicker, you can easily kind of press this, rub this on the skin to kind of buff in that thicker foundation as well. So I would say that this would be the most versatile foundation brush, and I highly recommend it. I actually have two of these, and they are almost always dirty. So this one just finished drying. Another go-to foundation brush for me, this is the Kyoto F04, formerly the Fupa 03. This is all synthetic fibers, and you can see that this is dense. It was actually designed to buff in like mineral powders, but I love it for the majority of foundations, unless it's super thin and runny. In that case, I find this can be a little bit, it's just a little bit too dense in that case. But for the majority of my foundations, this is my go-to. I also have two of these. This is the original Fupa 03. Then I have the F04, which is the new one as well. They are the same. And I have been using this brush for many years now, before I started YouTube. So it's definitely a great brush. Holds up really well, and it's a go-to for me. So those are two of my favorites. I have two more style options. I think that this Sonia G Jumbo Base, this is a really great brush as well, because again, you've got this angle, but this is going to be denser. So it works well to paint on something thin, but if you're not careful, you can kind of brush things away before they dry. But I think this is a very versatile brush because of this shape. So if you look at this, it works great for putting in like a cream contour or a cream bronzer, putting in like cream blush. And again, this is part of the Fusion series. So this one is also undyed goat hair with the two different types of synthetic fibers in here. So it can be used for any type of product. And I wanted to include this here with foundations, because I will typically apply my foundation with this. And then if I'm using cream face products, I do the rest of them with this same brush. And I just find it very useful. So I think it's a great one to have in a collection. And last up, I like these kind of more dome style buffing brushes. And again, just like with this jumbo base brush, I will typically put on my foundation with these and then go in with the cream blush products. Now, because these are a little bit larger, they don't have quite the same shape as the Sonia G. I'll typically use these more for cream blush, not so much cream contour or bronzer. However, this one here does work well for cream contour also, if you don't need to be super precise, because it is a little bit smaller. So this one in the red handle is the Kogan buffing brush. It is synthetic. This one here is also synthetic. This is the Mizuho brush, and you know, it's pretty inexpensive actually. So I would highly recommend, if you are placing an order at Fude Beauty sometime and you need another brush to pick up to get to like free shipping or something, this is a great one to add on. And this was actually recommended to me by my friend Lori, and she was right, it's great. And she tacks them on to like all of her orders when she needs something, gives them as gifts. I think that's a great idea. It's definitely something I'm going to do. And then you can see that the Kogan is going to be a little bit larger. So if you're looking for something specifically for foundation, not quite as versatile, this is a great one as well. And they both have kind of this dome shape, and they're dense enough to really buff in those thicker foundations. Anything like medium, like a medium texture would work with these. So far we've covered having a concealer brush or two, depending on what you need to cover, and 1 to 2 foundation brushes. So I think that's really important to have in your collection. And then powder brushes. There are so many different powder brushes out there. There are different styles, there are different fibers and textures and so forth. But I don't think you need a ton of powder brushes, but I think you need to find the one that is right for you, or 2 that are right for you. But I have a few different options here. For me, for a powder brush, I'm usually looking for something that is big and very soft. This is where I like to splurge. I like to splurge on the powder brushes, because if you are using like a finishing powder or something, it's just so nice to have something incredibly soft as the last thing that touches your skin. And with like loose powders and so forth, a very soft, fluffy powder brush that feels great on the skin also works really well with that style of product. So I do have a few different ones here. This is the Chikuhodo F09, and I love this one. This is the F01. So this was the powder brush in the FO series when it debuted. They have since come out with the F09, which is larger. The F01 is great as a powder brush, but I also really like it as a large blush brush. So if you're using a light colored blush, something close to your skin tone, then this brush is great for blush as well. But this is my choice actually for a powder brush. Now the FO series is all Silver Fox. So that is incredibly, incredibly soft and resilient. You can see here that there is a little bit of a bounce back to this, even though these fibers are so long. In general, the longer the hair or fiber, the floppier and less bounce back there is on a hair. So you can see that the Silver Fox have just a little bit more bounce than something like this, which is going to be squirrel hair. So just something to know there. I think this is a great choice for me for powder brushes. If you're looking for something for all over, I like something with this kind of general shape here. This is going to be the Chikuhodo brush that just recently came out. This one came out this year, and this is the Maki brush. You can see it's got a gorgeous design. And again, I like to splurge on the powder brushes because you can get some with gorgeous design. So I picked something that's special to me. So this is going to be kind of like your general shape if you're looking at something like the Chikuhodo Maki brushes or the Z1, which is another classic brush. This is another one I would highly recommend. This one here is Kairedo, but this is the Kairedo Kiwami powder brush, and it is fantastic. You've got some sparkles in the handle here, and you can see that the shape on this is a little bit different. It's a little domed, but it's got these angles here on the side. It's very, very soft. So some people prefer something with more of a pinched ferrule versus more of a round ferrule. That's going to be a personal preference, but they're both going to apply powder very beautifully. Round brushes, in my opinion, do a better job of doing more of a twirly motion, whereas something flatter is going to do something more like a sweeping motion. So it depends how you like to apply your makeup. But I think this is a great option. This is essentially the same as Suku Squirrel Hair Powder Brush that is no longer in existence and was incredibly expensive. This is a much, much more inexpensively priced option. There's another option, which is Fude Japan. If you've purchased from there, I purchase brushes from there all the time. But Fude Japan has their own line of brushes, which are made by Kairedo, and the powder brush in that line is essentially the same as well. That is going to have the Fude Japan logo on that. And I have that one also. They're essentially the same. So I would recommend one of these. I think they are a great option. Other powder brushes that I like, if you like paddle style, which I have to say I don't have too many of these, I find this is great for finishing powder, but if you want some sort of buffing action, this really doesn't work as well for that. This one here, I will have to put the name on the screen. It's the goldfish brush, Ihodo, I believe it is. And it is beautiful. You can get this with the silver ferrule or the gold ferrule. And this is great for more of that sweeping motion. And it works really well to put on like a light layer of setting powder or finishing powder. And it's super soft. So again, the difference in the ones I've shown you is this one here is going to have your pinched ferrule. It's giving you more of that paintbrush style appearance versus the rounder ferrule like this Kairedo, which will be better at a twirly motion. They're both going to give you essentially the same type of finish on the skin. It's really more about what you prefer to use for your application, which style you prefer. Now I do have one more powder brush that is kind of a multitasker. So let's look at that. So I mentioned that the Chikuhodo F01 was the original powder brush, and now I use it for blush, like lighter color blush as well. Well, I do have another multitasking brush. This is the Sonia G Master Face. It is one of my all-time favorite brushes. It's a mix of dyed and undyed goat hair. And this is really great for, you can use this all over your face powder. It is kind of in between something like these larger powder brushes and a buffing brush. So if you're looking for a multitasker, this is really going to be it because it is soft and airy enough to give you that light soft finish with a finishing or setting powder, yet there's enough density and it has kind of that more dome shape that is beneficial to buffing something in. So it won't buff something in quite as well as a true buffing brush, but if you don't want to purchase something like that because you don't use it very frequently, this is a great one to start with. This would definitely, if you're trying to really just stay to the bare minimum of brushes, this would be my face brush choice. You can also use this for blush. It is, I think if you're using a very contrasting shade of blush to your skin, something like, for me, it's something that would be really deep, this is too large. It would be too messy. However, if you're using something like a little closer to your skin tone, this will really kind of buff out the edges. Well, if, however, you do want to use a deep shade, you can always pat it on with your finger and then use this to buff it out. And as that works as well. So I think this is like a great multitasking brush. So if you had to really narrow things down, this would be my face brush choice. Next, let's talk about buffing brushes. These are two from Sonia G. We have what is now the Buffer Pro, formerly the Face One, and the Smooth Buffer. You can see that they are the same shape, but the Smooth Buffer is smaller and the Buffer Pro is larger. So I think it is a really great idea to have a buffing brush in your collection because it works well for so many reasons. If you had to pick one, I would go with the Smooth Buffer because it's a little bit more versatile because this works great at buffing blush into your skin. Sometimes you want to buff a blush into your skin to not only make it look more skin-like, but you can bring out like a different sheen or finish to the blush, or, with certain shades, it just it can work a little bit better. Like for me, with certain shades and formulas, I prefer buffing brush. The Sisley Fido blushes, which I love, I like to buff those in using this brush. So this one here, it's small, so it'll work really well on the cheeks, but if you need to buff something larger into your face, it might take you a little bit longer, but this works. Now, another product I love using the buffing brushes for are the Guerlain Meteorites. Personally, I like to put those all over my face with a buffing brush, so I would prefer the Face One or Buffer Pro. If that's not something you do frequently, I think just the Sonia G Smooth Buffer would be sufficient. Next up, I think it's important to have a bronzer brush. And even if you're somebody who doesn't use bronzer, you might want to have a bronzer brush in your collection for different applications of blush. And there are a wide variety of different ones that I have and love. I use different bronzer brushes depending on the formula of the bronzer, but also just depending on whether or not I want to have a lot of bronzer or a little bit of bronzer, and if I want to use it more as contour or more as like a bronzing blush. So this one here is the Refer 24. I love this one for putting on a little bit of bronzer. You can also use this for blush. It's dense, so if you want to get a very light application, you need to make sure that you're not using a lot of product, because this will kind of intensify the product that you have on your brush because it will buff it into your skin. So this I think is a fantastic bronzer brush for that. So this is one of my choices, but I also really love angled brushes. This is the Chikuhodo F04. Again, this is great for blush and for bronzer and for contour. So I think this is a great option, and it's incredibly soft. So if you want to use a buffing motion, I would get the Refer. If you like something very soft and more of a, just more of a soft powder application, I would go with the F04. So again, this one here is going to be Silver Fox, whereas the Refer is Undyed Goat Hair. This can be used with liquids, creams, and powders, whereas this, you want to stick with powder products. So I think that makes a big difference. Now, sometimes you want to kind of use bronzer all over. And I have to say, this is wet right now, but my new favorite is the Sonia G Jumbo Bronzer that she just released. And I was not able to pick up a second one because I did want to give everybody a chance when it first, was released, and it did sell out. So I think that one's great if you like having something a little bit more directional, because this one here is kind of looser. So this is going to be great for like a very light application all over and so forth. I have a whole video on this, so definitely check that out. This is also a great one for like paddle style for loose powder and so forth as well. So you could double this one up with your face powder brush if you'd like. So I think that's a good option. Whereas this one is the Niji Pro from Sonia G. This one is going to have a little bit more firmness right here in the center, so you can be a little bit more specific with it. And this is great for contour and bronzer as well. So it depends what your application style or what your application preference is. This will be a little bit more precise, whereas the Jumbo Bronzer is going to be a little bit fluffier. Now, other options here are angled cheek brushes. I think angled cheek brushes in general work great for bronzer and for blush. So if you are trying to minimize the number of brushes, you might just want to go with an angled cheek brush for blush and for bronzer and not end up with two. These are two great options here. And if you like something smaller, the Refer 04 is a great option. And we did already cover the Chikuhodo F04. So this Refer 04, this one's going to be a little bit stiffer. This is undyed goat hair, so I like this one. You can use this with creams and so forth, but I like this more for buffing and powders because there's a little bit of stiffness, but because of the angle, you also have a lot of flexibility at this end, which, although you can use it with creams, I don't love as much with creams as I do the 24 from Refer. So just another option here. Most of the time though, with an angled cheek brush, I often go for something that is very, very soft and fluffy. So these are two similar options. This is the Sonia G Face Pro, undyed and dyed goat hair blend. And same thing here with this Hakuhodo. You can see they have a very similar shape. and they're similar in size. The Hakuhodo is a little bit smaller. I'll leave the number of this one on the screen. Unfortunately, Hakuhodo doesn't label their brushes, so I'm not sure what the number is off the top of my head. I'll have to look that up. But I think this is a great option because you can use this for blush, you can use it for bronzer or contour. Just note that these are a little bit larger. So again, if you're looking for something to be a little bit more specific with bronzer or contour application, these are a little bit large for that. In my opinion, I would go with something more like the Niji Pro, which is just a little bit firmer in the center than these. Or go with a smaller brush in general, like the rougher 04, which you can put on and then turn it to kind of buff that out as well. So if you are having a separate blush brush, or you don't wear bronzer and you don't even want to deal with a bronzing brush, I would recommend moving on to a traditional blush brush. And there are really two different styles of this, just like there are with the powder brushes. You have something that's going to be more domed, that's great for buffing. You also have something that's got more of a pinched ferrule that is going to be great for kind of like either patting or sweeping the blush on. So this one, I apologize, is wet. I thought I had a second one, but I guess I don't. This is the Sonia G Classic Cheek. This is one of my favorites because it has a dome shape. You can kind of see here. This will have a dome shape, yet it has some density here. I don't want to press on this since it's wet right now, but this is one that I find to be the most versatile blush brush. If I had to pick a blush brush to repurchase right away, it would be this one because it works great to sort of softly buff in powders. You can dab on powders, but it also works well for creams and liquids. So it is my number one pick for a blush brush if you're just getting one. And if you're looking for something with a pinch ferrule, this is the Sonia G Cheek from the Lotus series, which is the same as the Cheek Pro. The Cheek Pro here, you can see, has dyed goat hair. So this is specific for powders, whereas the one in the Lotus series is undyed goat hair and can be used with liquids and creams. To say I really like both of them, I tend to go for undyed goat hair when possible, just because it gives me a little bit more versatility in case I do want to use liquids or creams. And if you're starting a new collection or minimizing how many brushes you have, I would highly recommend undyed goat hair just because of that versatility there. However, they are the same shape and they both will apply your powders essentially the same. Anytime you have a dyed fiber, it will make the fiber just a little bit softer than the undyed version. Just like when you dye your own hair, you know, it kind of weakens your hair a little bit. And if you've noticed, when you dye your hair, you know, your hair always looks so much better like the first few days because it's like more like chemically relaxed essentially. And that's what happens to the dyed brush hair fibers as well. So we'll make them slightly softer. Now I wanted to mention this brush, but it is not available. This is a Chikuhodo KZ4 and is my very favorite blush brush. This is Kazan Squirrel Hair. It is incredibly soft. It's a true luxury to use this. It's powder only. They don't make it anymore. Unfortunately, it was very limited. So I want to mention this for the shape. So this actually has a similar shape to the Classic Cheek, but the fibers are a little bit longer. And you can see that the dome here is a little more angled, whereas the Classic Cheek is going to be completely rounded. But they both have a round ferrule, which means that they're going to be great for going like this or dabbing on and sweeping. So it's a very versatile shape. If you prefer more of a sweeping motion, I recommend either, this is the Fude Japan version, but the Kairedo Kiwami cheek brush or the Suku cheek brush, which from the Squirrel series, which is no longer, or again, this Fude Japan one. This is incredibly soft. So if you exclusively use powder blushes and you're looking for a very soft, luxurious experience on your cheek, definitely go with a squirrel hairbrush. But I would still recommend having something a little bit firmer in your collection because sometimes you have those more firmly pressed blushes and they won't pick up the product from the pan as easily with a squirrel hair as they would with an undyed goat hair. So if you're going to go with a squirrel hair brush, I highly recommend also having something like an undyed goat hair brush in your collection, just for the ease of use with different formulas. But if you're looking for something luxurious, this would be my choice for cheek brushes, either Kairedo Kiwami cheek or Fude Japan cheek. Another brush that's very important to have in your collection is a highlighter brush. And there are two different styles that I personally gravitate towards, and that would be fan brushes and smaller angled cheek brushes. So these are my two picks for fan brushes. I reach for the two of these all the time. This is the Omnia Gold brush. This is going to be dyed goat hair. It's not as high of a grade as the goat hair with the Sonia G brushes. Sonia G typically uses Seikaho. Sokoho is a lower level, and that's typically what you're going to find in the Omnia brushes, as well as the Refer. Now, Refer actually uses a mix of different grades of goat hair. So some of the brushes, you'll see some Seikaho and some Sokoho, and they usually mix them together. So they usually just say goat hair. So some will be softer than others. But I have to say the Refer 20 fan brush is my favorite. It's soft and wispy, so it applies highlighter really well. The Omnia Gold one is slightly larger, and it's just a little bit more dense than the Refer, but ever so slightly. So these are both great options for highlight that I feel like they are a must-have in my collection. They're my favorite fan brushes as well. And then I also really like angled cheek brushes for highlighter. Now, I do want to give an honorable mention. I don't want to talk about these brushes too much yet, but this is the Chikuhodo. It's technically an eyeshadow brush, but I like to use this for highlight as well. It's a little bit small, but this candle shaped brush is great in general as well. But again, it's not currently available. It should be back at some point, but we'll talk about that in the Chikuhodo Zen series video, which is coming soon. So again, for highlight, if you're going with these angled cheek brushes, these two are almost the same. You can see that the shapes are very, very similar. You have a blend of dyed and undyed goat hair in each of these. So this is the Sonia G detail brush from the Lotus series. And again, this is a Hakuhodo that I will put the number on the screen. But I think this is a great option. And then, as I mentioned, things with this shape are also great. My favorite is not available. So I'll show it to you, but I can't really recommend it because I've tried others that are similarly shaped, but nothing compares to this one, and it's not available. So this is the Chikuhodo KZ3. And you can see here that the eyeshadow brush in the Zen series is kind of like a smaller version, a little bit more pointy as well. But this is going to be your candle shape brush. And this is great for highlight. This is great for blush. There are a variety of other brush series that have this shape. I just haven't found one that I like as much as this to make it into this. So for highlighter, me personally, if you are trying to start with what's available now, I would go with either a fan brush or an angled cheek brush, depending on your preference. And how, this is great because if you want to do a very soft highlighter all over the cheek, this covers the whole thing at once, whereas your angled cheek brush is going to be a little bit more precise, works really well around the nose and everything for bronzer and things like that as well. Next, let's move on to eyeshadow brushes. Now, I definitely believe that every collection should have one of each of the face brush categories that we mentioned, but for eyes, because it is so imperative for your eye health to make sure you're always using clean tools, I would actually recommend getting more eye brushes than just one or two. So I like to clean my brushes more frequently than most people do. Most people will clean their brushes once a week or once a month. I like to clean mine after every use, except some of these powder brushes and things, I will, I'll use them for a few days before washing. Eye brushes, however, I always wash after every use, because you don't want to mess around with any potential bacteria getting into your eyes and messing with your eye health. So we've got crease brushes here, and I would recommend getting at least 2 crease brushes, and I would not be against getting doubles of those. So I think it's really important to have a big crease brush to kind of buff that whole area and a smaller crease brush. Now, if you really want to, you could do your entire eye look just with crease brushes, but they're not always going to be effective with every formula that you use. So my favorite crease brush, if you're looking for one very versatile one, that's actually this Refer 27. And the reason this is my favorite is it's wide, it's large, but it also has just a little tiny bit of, like, you can see it's flat here, but it's so flat in such a small part that it's almost like a point, which means if you go in very softly, you can also get more precision. So if you only wanted one crease brush, I'd go with one or two of these. But I think it's great to have options. I personally like to have a large and a small. So Refer makes some crease brushes. They have the 13, 14, 15, and 16 that are all this shape, just different sizes. So this small one here's the 13, then we have the 15. The 14 is going to be in the middle, the 16 is a little bit larger. I like to pair them either 13, 15 or 14, 16. The 13, 15 is my favorite combination because, again, you have something large and then you have something small and targeted that you can either deepen your crease with, you can use outer corner, you can even use to smudge under the eye if you want a soft smudge. So I would highly recommend those. And then if you are exclusively using powders, a squirrel hair option like this is the Chikuhodo Z11. This is a great versatile brush. I use this one all the time. I think this is fantastic. If you are not doing any complicated eye looks and you're just doing like a simple color in the crease, this is really the only one you would need for that in that case. And then the other crease brush I really like here is the Sonia G Crease Pro. You can see that this one's going to be a little bit stiffer and it really comes more to a point. This, I think, works really great to give you a more targeted application in your crease. If you really want to buff that out though and get a really soft blur, this is just a little bit stiffer than I would like for that. So in that case, I would pair that with the Chikuhodo Z11 or maybe something like one of those larger Refers like the 15, 16 or the 27. So these would be my preferences for the crease brushes if you had to narrow them down. Again, any of these ones with the white hairs are undyed Go hair and can be used with anything. Anything like this Chikuhodo Z11 is powder only. Now, the other style of eyeshadow brush that I think everybody needs to have is a shader brush, which is my personal favorite. And my number one favorite shader brush is the Sonia G Soft Shader. You can see that you have kind of this more curved shape here. It's rounded. Shader brushes are always going to be a little bit more tightly pressed. They're going to have a pinched ferrule and they're great for laying down product. Undyed Go hair, again, get this wet, use it with a mixing medium. It works great for any of those shimmery shades or cream shadows as well. So this is my most versatile brush. I have 4 of these or 5 of them because I use it every day. And other options, I think the Worker Pro from Sonia G is another great option. You can see it's going to be very similar, but it's just not quite as flat, not quite as tightly pressed as a soft shader, but it is a little bit more narrow. So I think this is a great option as well. It's another one that I use a ton. And then I also want to mention this Chikuhodo B004G. So this one is one that I use all the time, and you can see it's going to be a little bit smaller. Mine's a little wet right now, but you can see compared to the soft shader, this is going to be a little bit more square. It's a little bit shorter and it's a little bit thinner as well. So this works great with just like the soft shader, like creams, metallics, and things like that. But it also works well with dry things. And if you want to go under the eye, this shape here, this more squared off top here, works really well as smudge under the eye, which makes this a very versatile brush. It is quickly becoming a favorite up there with the Sonia G. These are my 2 top picks for soft shader style brushes. However, if you're somebody who typically only uses one shade of an eyeshadow at a time, you can go with any of the brushes from like Chikuhodo or Hakuhodo, the general eyeshadow brushes. This one here is actually the Fude Japan or also the Kairedo Kiwami eyeshadow brush. These I think are really great because you can see that they're soft. They have the shape of a shader because they have that pinched ferrule, but they're wider and they're a little bit longer. So these can kind of be a blend of a shader and a crease style brush. So if you are somebody who only uses one shade on the eye essentially at a time, or perhaps even two, you could get by with just one brush like this. This would be my pick for this style of brush, aside from the KZ brush, which again is no longer. So, I mean, I'm sorry, that's just my favorite brush series. And then I also think it's great to have a pencil brush in your collection. It depends what style you like. I personally like to smoke things out a little bit more on my lower lash line. I don't stay super thin with them. So I like slightly thicker ones like these. This is the Sonia G Pencil Pro, which I use all the time. This is the Chikuhodo eyeshadow brush. And you can see that this is super, super soft. So this won't work well with firm eyeshadows. This is really going to give you a very soft smudge. If you want something to move things a little bit more, something like this is a Chikuhodo T8. This is great. I love all three of these brushes for inner corner and lower lash line, and that's where they excel. The Refer also has one, I believe it's a 26. Mine is drying right now, but it's going to be a very similar shape to this T8. I believe it's a little bit larger than this though. So those are all, I think, great options for pencil brushes. Now, I do think it's great to have a liner brush in your collection. It doesn't have to be a Fude brush though. So this one here is actually the Byredo brush. This is just a slanted brush. You can use this for lips. You can use it for eyeliner. You can also get one of the like pointy style, eyeliner brushes like this. And these are just great for when you are turning. I like this kind if I'm using eyeshadow as an eyeliner, whether it's dry or wet, but this style I use exclusively with like water or a mixing medium to turn an eyeshadow into a liquid liner. So those are also brushes that I think are important to have in every collection, but they don't have to be a Fude brush in my opinion, even if you're looking for like good quality. Now I did want to just mention these Byredo eyeshadow brushes here. So these here are going to be number 2 and number 3. And you can see that these are a little bit domed. This is a little bit more of a crease brush. This is domed. And then there's another one that is a larger dome brush. If you work with a lot of cream eyeshadows or a lot of those more putty-like eyeshadow formulas, I think you need to have domed eyeshadow brushes like this in your collection, just because they work so much better than any of the others. So, I mean, these will work better with the Byredo Nugget shadow than even like the Soft Shader or the Worker Pro from Sonia G. So it all depends what formula you use and what you like to gravitate to, but I think these domed brushes work really well for putties and creams in particular. Anything that's a little bit drier that needs a little bit more stiffness in their brush. And I would have to say that the Byredo eyeshadow brushes are fantastic for that. So, and these are synthetic vegan brushes. They are not Fude, but I just think that they are totally worth getting if you use that type of formula a lot. If you stick with powders a lot, or that's something you use not on a regular basis, these aren't necessary, but it all depends what you use on a regular basis, what you use most often. So if I were starting my collection over, or I were gifting someone a complete starter set of what I think were the main necessities for brushes, my favorites would include these. We have the Sonia G Soft Concealer with the Refer 31 foundation brush. For powder brush, I would choose the Sonia G Master Face, and I would use the Chikuhodo F04 for bronzer. Sonia G Smooth Buffer, which again I would use for blush and to buff in things like the meteorites. For blush, this is again drying right now, so it looks a little funky, but this is the Classic Cheek from Sonia G. I would definitely have that because again, undyed hair, For highlight, I would choose the Refer 20 fan brush. And my choices for the eye brushes would be the Refer 13, 15, the Sonyoji Soft Shader, and the Chikuhodo T8 for a pencil brush. And then for liner, I would go with the Byredo angled liner, or Esum makes one too. Honestly, it doesn't really matter which brand it is, but this particular shape I think is very versatile, whether you're using powders or liquids. So those would be my choices. And then if you are somebody who likes a lip brush, I have to admit, I don't use lip brushes that often. My favorites here are the Wayne Goss 07, and this is the Chikuhodo I think it's AF8. Yes, the AF8. So this I like for edging around the lips, really getting precision. And if you are somebody who likes to apply your lipstick or lip gloss with a brush, this is great for those larger areas. So these are other options. And I also will use the Wayne Goss 07 for eyeliner too. So I hope this was helpful. I would love to know what brushes you would choose for your collection and what your all-time favorites are. And definitely let me know down below in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and share this video with your friends, because that really helps my channel grow. And thank you so much. I hope to see you again very soon, and have a great day.